Welcome back. In today's video we will learn how to integrate UIKit components in SwiftUI. And we will learn this by building a photo picker app with a component that is currently only available in UIKit but not available in SwiftUI. So without any further ado, let's get started. Now what is UIKit? UIKit is Apple's framework for native iOS UI components. UIKit is still used today, and a lot of components such as the UI switch and UI label, for those we do have a SwiftUI counterpiece. However, the UIKit has a lot of components for which we do not have something in SwiftUI which would be equivalent to it. Now, one example for this is the photo picker. For the photo picker, we have two options in the UIKit world. We can either use the UI image picker view controller or the newly introduced PH photo picker view controller, which is available for iOS 14 and later. However, as of now, we do not have something similar in the SwiftUI world. Now, it is important to understand the difference between UIKit and SwiftUI. These were implemented with two different programming paradigms in mind. Now, in the imperative world, we have to tell our views how to do things. So we have to tell it to set the text to something, and then based on some conditions, we may have to change the text. So we will implicitly set the text for the labels ourselves at appropriate time. However, in the declarative world, it is a bit different. Now what we have here is a state, and the view basically represents the state, and whenever the state changes, in this case the source of truth, the view gets automatically rendered, and therefore the updating happens on its own. So we do not really have to tell it how to update the label, but instead we have to only tell it what we want. So we want it to represent the source of truth. Nevertheless, you're still reliable on UIKit. In fact, still today, UIKit is used a lot, and it will still take a few years till SwiftUI can catch up with UIKit in terms of availability of different components. Now, what are we going to do with the photo picker since we do not have a SwiftUI replacement? Well, let's take a look at the PH Photo Picker View Controller. Now, the PH Photo Picker View Controller is basically a screen that allows the user to choose a photo from his photo library, for example. However, if you look at the declaration, you will immediately see that this class inherits from UIViewController and UIViewControllers from UIKit. So is it still possible for us to use UIViewControllers in SwiftUI? Yes, there is. And for that, Apple introduced a new protocol called UIViewControllerRepresentable. This protocol basically allows us to integrate UIKit ViewControllers into SwiftUI views. Now, in order for it to work, we have to provide it some methods. These methods basically define how to create, update, and tear down your view controller. Because in the SwiftUI world, this is not done by us. It is all done by the system. And for the system to do it, we have to tell it how to do it. Once we have defined these methods, the system will call these methods automatically at the appropriate times. Now, let's break this down a bit. When it says use its methods, it's basically talking about the methods in the protocol, which are called make UIViewController, update UIViewController, and the dismantle UIViewController. Now, these three methods alone are enough to present the image picker controller to the user. However, when the user makes a change or selection of an image, nothing will really happen, because in the UIKit world, we would listen to these things, or we would use a pattern called delegation to react to these changes. However, with these three methods alone, it is not enough to pass these changes through our SwiftUI view. So therefore, the documentation says that we also need to provide a coordinator that takes care of the communication from this picker to the SwiftUI view. Now, I know this is a lot of theory, but let's go into Xcode and see how this actually works in practice. All right, now the app that we're going to build by the end of this tutorial is going to be very simple. So here at the bottom, we have a button, and when we tap on it, we will get the PH Picker View Controller presented, and we can simply choose a photo from our photo library. And as you can see, once we do the selection, the view is filled with that image as well. So without any further ado, let's get started. All right, now open Xcode and create a new project. As always, make sure you select app and give it some name. Now I will call mine Photos Demo. Also make sure you select SwiftUI as the interface, SwiftUI app as the lifecycle, and Swift as your language. And then press next and save it somewhere you like. Also make sure that you select the iPhone 11 as your simulator and if possible, try to get the automatic preview to resume. Now let's start with the UI up to the point where we have the button here at the bottom that allows us to present the PH Picker View Controller. So I will replace this text here with a Z stack. And inside I will have a vertical stack, add some spacer here. And down here I will have a button with an action and a custom label. Actually, let me make some space here. Now the button is gonna look as follows. So I will have an H stack, and inside of that horizontal stack I will have an image with the system name photo, font with the system size, and this will give us this nice image icon. And next to it I want to have the label, so I'll create a text that simply says choose photo, and we can also give it a font, for example, headline. Now let's give this button a background, so I will say background and give it a color of blue. And before that I'm also gonna set the frame, and here I want the minimum width to be 0, the max width to be infinity, and the minimum height 0, and the maximum height to be 50. Now we don't see the label anymore, so what we can do is we can give it a foreground color of white, and then we can also give it a corner radius of 20 or 10, and lastly give it some padding here. Alright, nice. So when this button is tapped, we want to present a sheet, and the way we do that is we can go to our Z stack here, and then at the bottom we can say sheet, and we need to provide a binding, a boolean binding that basically keeps track of whether the sheet should be shown or not. So let me first create a state variable for that. So I'll create a private variable called show photo library, and I will set it initially to false. Now I will copy this and pass it in here, but make sure you add the $ in front of it because you want to access the binding. And since the last argument here is a closure, we can write it a bit more nicely by simply writing this as follows. And here we would present our PH Picker View Controller. Now there's one more thing we need here. We need a state for the current image. So let me create another state variable. I will call this image, and it's going to be optional because it could fail that the image that was selected could not be decoded, or some other issue could happen. And we want to present that image only if it is not nil, so if it exists. So I will say image and then add a question mark here, and everything afterwards only is applied to it if it is not nil. So I want it to be resizable, I want it to scale to fill, I also want to give it a frame with a minimum width of 0 and a maximum width of infinity. Lastly, I want to make sure that I set edges ignoring safe area, and I want to ignore all safe areas. So I want the image to really fill the whole screen. All right, now the only thing that is left here is to get our PH Picker View Controller work with SwiftUI. Now for this, I will create a new file. And it's going to be a Swift file, and I will simply name this one photo picker. All right, now once I'm in here, I want to make sure that I import Photos UI. And I also want to make sure that I import SwiftUI, because the SwiftUI framework contains the UIViewControllerRepresentable protocol, and the Photos UI contains the PH Picker View Controller that we need. So let's go ahead and create a struct called photo picker, and it's going to conform to the UIViewControllerRepresentable. Now once we do that, Xcode will complain because we do not conform to this protocol yet. And if you look in here, you should see that it requires you to implement the 3 methods that we talked about before. So the make UI view controller, the update, and the dismantle. However, this one is optional. So let's go back and start by implementing the first 2. So I will create the make UI view controller one first. Now here I'm supposed to return some UI view controller, but we can be a bit more specific because we're interested in the PH Picker View Controller. Now here I can define the controller. So it is going to be a PH Picker View Controller, and it needs the configuration to be initialized. So let's also define this one. And the configuration is going to be of type phPicker configuration, and you can initialize it with the photo library the picker should use. So I want to use the shared one, so I will simply say photo library.shared. Now another cool thing you can do with the configuration is you can say that you only want to be able to see the images, so you can say filter only the images from the user's photo library. Now you have to make sure that this is a variable because you're modifying it. Now let's pass the configuration to the controller, and then lastly we can return the controller. Now the next method we have to implement is the update UIViewController. Now in most cases you do not need to do anything in here, and in fact in this case we also do not have to provide any additional code for the updating. Now let's go ahead and give it also a binding to keep track of whether it should be presented or not. So a create a binding variable is presented. It's going to be of type Boolean. Right, now let's go back to the content view. So here we can present our new photo picker. And remember, we need to provide the binding so it knows whether it should be shown or not. And here we would also pass the same binding as the one needed to show the bottom sheet. Now there's one more thing we have to do. At no point in time we're really setting the show photo library to true, and we want this to happen when the button was tapped. So let me set it here to true and then run the simulator and see if that works. All right, now let me try and press the choose photo button. As you can see, the phPicker view controller was presented and we can choose a photo. However, when we do so, you will see that nothing really happens because we're not really reacting to the change, and we're also not dismissing it here. So let's go back to Xcode and fix that. All right, now to react to these changes, we have to go back to the photo picker, and we have to make sure that we provide a coordinator that takes care of the communication in regards to the change. So it also has a function called make coordinator. Now in some cases you do not need a coordinator, but here we do. So we also want to return a coordinator in here, and we still have to define the coordinator. And since this coordinator is only needed for this photo picker, we can create it inside of the struct as follows. So I will say coordinator, and I also want to pass the photo picker to the coordinator so that the coordinator can also pass back the image that was selected and also change the state whether it was presented. So to do that, we have to make sure that we create a property called parent, and it's going to be a photo picker, and in the initializer we will initialize it with the parent, and when this is passed we will simply set it to the passed photo picker, and all we have to do now in here is return the coordinator, and we will initialize it with the parent, which in this case is the struct we are in, so we will just write self. All right, now the coordinator is now able to interact with the photo picker. Now we want the coordinator to also be able to take care of the changes. And the way it worked in UIKit was using a delegation pattern. So the phPicker view controller, for example, had a protocol called phPicker view controller delegate. And if we conform to it, we will also get a method called did finish picking. Now the did finish picking is called whenever the user picks a photo from the library. Now the first thing I want to do when the user picked a photo is to dismiss the picker, and for that we have to access the photo pickers is presented binding variable, and the way we do that is we can simply access the parent from here and say parent is presented is equal to false. Now, inside of this method, we also have access to the photos that were selected. And the cool thing about phPicker view controllers is they allow you to also select multiple photos. That's why you have an array here. But we're only interested in the one or the first one that the user selects. Now, to get the first image, I'm going to do the following. I will first access the item provider. So I will say results.first.item provider, and I want to also make sure that the item provider can load an object of a specific class, and the class we're interested in is the UI image. Now, if this is true and I can really load an object and it can be casted as a UI image, I want to load it. So I will say item provider.load. And here I will have access to a completion handler too. But before that, I have to once again tell it the type we're interested in. And here for the completion handler, I will have access to the UI image and the arrow. Now inside of the closure, we will access self. So I will also write weak self to avoid strong references. Now inside of this closure body, I will say dispatch queue.main.async. And I want to make sure that gotlet self is equal to self. And I will also try to cast the UI image as a UI image. Now, if that is not possible, I will simply return. Now, once that is given, I want to set the image to the parent. However, the parent doesn't have a property to keep track of that image. So I will have a binding here as well. Selected image. And it's going to be an optional image. Now down here, I can then, once I have access to this UI image, I can simply say self.parent.selected image is equal to the image that we are going to initialize with a UI image. And that is the one we get in the closure. Now this alone won't work because we have to do one more thing. Now we do have a coordinator in here and that is fine. And it conforms to this PH picker view controller delegate, but we haven't set who's really the delegate of it. And to do that, we have to go back to the make UI view controller. And here I will simply say controller.delegate, and I will set the delegate to whatever is passed as a context coordinator. Now let's go back to the content view, try to run it on the simulator. Xcode will complain because we have another binding here. Now let me fix that. Now we have to provide our binding to the image. Now remember, we have the state property here, which keeps track of the image. So all I have to do is use the dollar symbol and then say image, and it should stop complaining. All right, now let's go ahead and run it on the simulator and see if that works. Now if I go ahead and press choose photo and choose a photo from here, you will see the picker is dismissed and the image is passed up all the way to the content view and is set as the background image here. All right, now one last thing I would like to show you is, remember in this photo picker, we used this UIViewControllerRepresentable protocol. Now this one is for UIViewControllers, but in UIKit, you also have a lot of UI views and you can also use them, and there's a protocol for them. And all you have to do is remove the controller part here and it is called UIViewRepresentable. And it works pretty similar. And one example for it would be the map kit. The map kit view is basically inheriting from the UI view, so you could also use the map view in SwiftUI using this protocol. All right, now this is all I wanted to show you. I hope this was helpful. As always, make sure you subscribe to the channel and press the bell button so you get notified when new content arrives. Thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next tutorial.